Guys, this video is made possible by the heroes over at Backblaze. Just go to backblaze.com/biographics and get hooked up with unlimited backup for $6 a month and a 15-day free trial to test it out. Don't delay, do it today, and let's get into today's video. It's the 1st of October, 1938. Heston Airport, just outside of London. A man steps out of a propeller airplane to address a crowd of journalists, officials, and onlookers. He waves in triumph a piece of paper carrying 2 signatures, his and the other one for a certain Mr. A. Hitler. The man is hailed as a national hero as he announces that he has truly achieved peace for our times. This man, whose status as a hero will soon be critiqued by none other than Winston Churchill, is the current British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain. He has just signed an agreement with the German government, preventing a war in Europe, at least for the moment, but sacrificing the young state of Czechoslovakia to Nazi demands. Neville Chamberlain has become synonymous with the ill-advised policy of appeasement, an emblem of the West's weakness when faced by the aggressive bullying of the Axis powers. But in the video today, we look at whether this infamy is really deserved. Arthur Neville Chamberlain was born in Birmingham, England on March 18, 1869 in a wealthy, politically involved family, although they were not part of the aristocracy. His father, Joseph, was a cabinet minister during Queen Victoria's reign who had married twice, having a total of 6 children. There was Beatrice and Austin from a previous marriage, and then Neville and 3 daughters, Ethel, Ida, and Hilda, from his second wife. As was tradition at that time, it was down to the boys to perpetrate the trade and traditions of the family. Austin, Neville's older half-brother, was the one to initially carry out the political ambitions of the Chamberlains. He took up a string of civil service and political posts, culminating his career as Foreign Secretary in the 1920s. He was the mastermind behind the Treaty of Locarno between Great Britain, France, Weimar Germany, Italy, and Belgium, which earned him a Nobel Peace Prize. Neville, on the other hand, was expected to take the reins of the family's main business enterprises. He perfected his education first at the Rugby School and then at Mason College, now the University of Birmingham. Coming from a privileged family does not guarantee happiness, though, and it was reported that Neville was an introverted, shy boy whose school years were plagued by incidents of bullying. After his formative years, aged only 21, Neville was tasked by his father to manage one of the Chamberlain's business enterprises. This would be a daunting task for anyone, but it might have been made lighter by the fact that the job involved managing a plantation in the Bahamas. This must have been quite fun for young Neville, but unfortunately after some years that business venture had ultimately failed. Neville had anyhow proven himself to be a talented manager and supervisor. After returning to England, he would put that experience to successful use, first in the private sector and then following Austin's footsteps into politics. In 1911, Neville Chamberlain secured his first political post by winning a seat in the Birmingham City Council. In that same year, he married Anne Vere Cole, with whom he would later have 2 children, Dorothy and Francis. Chamberlain's next step was to secure a higher position in local politics, which he did by becoming Lord Mayor of Birmingham in 1915. By now aged 49, he was too old to serve in World War I, but he did contribute to the war effort as Director of the National Service, an appointment awarded directly by Prime Minister Lloyd George. This job involved compulsion, which is basically the equivalent of conscription for war industries. However, all of Chamberlain's attempts to drive compulsory labour into industries vital to the war effort were hampered by the unions, by the War Cabinet, or by Lloyd George himself. Apparently the 2 men could not stand each other. After Chamberlain finally resigned in August of 1917, Lloyd George wrote to his family, "Chamberlain has resigned, and thank God for that." Chamberlain referred to the Prime Minister as such, that dirty little Welsh attorney. This experience almost deterred him to stay clear of politics, but he made a comeback into public life by winning a seat in the House of Commons in 1918 as a member of the Conservative Party. From then on, his career was on the rise. In 1922, he became Postmaster General in Andrew Bonar Law's government, a test that he passed with flying colours, becoming Minister of Health within months and shortly afterwards Chancellor of the Exchequer. All of this was done in little more than a year and within 5 years of his entering Parliament. And just by the way, for those who are not familiar with the workings of the British government, government, the Chancellor of the Exchequer is sort of the secretary or the minister in charge of the economy, so it's a big deal. Chamberlain retained this post for the following years and did very well. In 1929, he reformed the so-called Poor Law, which laid down the foundations for the welfare state. In the crisis that followed the Wall Street crash, he protected the fragile state of British industry by passing the Import Duties Bill in 1932. All of this hard work, it paid off, and in May of 1937, Neville Chamberlain was elected leader of the Conservative Party and succeeded Stanley Baldwin as Prime Minister. His early efforts, they were a continuation of his welfare reforms. For example, the Factories Act of 1937 restricted the number of hours that children and women worked, and in 1938, Chamberlain supported the Holiday with Pay Act, which gave workers a week off with pay. So by looking at his career so far, you could see how the shy boy from rugby school had turned into an active and ambitious leader willing to bring about improvements to the society around him by breaking with established traditions. However, his achievements on the domestic front were about to be overshadowed by a looming crisis in a faraway land. Alright, so I'm not going to chart here the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party and how the new German government immediately started making plans for territorial annexations. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a bit. For now, let's just scroll our Google Maps south of Berlin and instead look at the Sudetenland region instead. This is a region in then Czechoslovakia which bordered with Germany and was home to some 3 million ethnic Germans. Back in 1931, a Sudeten German called Konrad Henlein had founded the Sudeten Germans People Party, which advocated for the region to secede and be annexed by Germany. Needless to say, in the following decade, Nazi leadership had openly supported Henlein's cause. Sure, Germans on both sides of the Czechoslovak border wanted to be reunited, but the push for annexations had far more materialistic reasons which worried the government in Prague. The Sudeten region was home to the lignite and coal mines. It was also the most heavily defended, meaning a peaceful annexation to Germany would have granted a convenient stepping stone to annex the whole of Czechoslovakia. So why would Nazi Germany be so interested in absorbing that small, young Central European state? Well, that would be Škoda. Today, these guys manufacture affordable city cars, but back then the Škoda Works were one of the largest armament manufacturers in Europe. The production volume of Škoda Works between August 1938 and September 1939 alone was nearly equal to that of all British arsenal factories in that period. And sorry to jump ahead here, but in 1939 a certain Hermann Göring made a nice little profit by acquiring shares in Škoda. So I'm going to venture a personal observation here and say that Nazi leadership's main interest was probably not the well-being of Konrad Henlein and the Sudeten Germans, but rather to replenish their arsenals and their pockets. But let's get back to the crisis. In late summer 1938, the Nazi Party asked Heinlein to stir some trouble as a means to create an excuse for a military invasion. The governments of Edvard Beneš in Prague had created a system of defensive alliance with France and the Soviet Union, but neither of them was really keen to intervene should an invasion occur. Chamberlain was well aware that if France did intervene, also Britain would be dragged into a European war, which not only himself, but his whole cabinet and the majority of the public opinion were keen to avoid at all costs. The British Prime Minister then took the initiative to lead a series of negotiations throughout September of 1938 to prevent an armed conflict. The first meeting with Hitler took place at Berchtesgaden near Munich. At this meeting, Hitler demanded that the Sudetenland should be handed over to Germany. Without consulting Edvard Beneš, Chamberlain agreed that those areas contained more than 50% Germans and should be handed back to Germany. Chamberlain managed to get the Czechs and the French to agree to this solution. On September the 22nd, Chamberlain flew again to Germany to meet Hitler so that the final details of the plan could be worked out. Hitler had a very low opinion of Chamberlain, describing him in private as ein Arschloch, and so it was no surprise that the Führer stunned the Prime Minister with a whole new set of demands. These were: number 1, German troops were to occupy the Sudetenland. Number 2, Czech lands containing a majority of Poles and Hungarians should be returned to Poland and Hungary. Effectively, Hitler was demanding for a dissolution of Czechoslovakia. This time, Chamberlain and French President Daladier rejected these demands. The stalemate was unlocked by Benito Mussolini. He proposed an emergency conference in Munich to reach an agreement once and for all. The participants were Germany, Great Britain, France, and Italy. And can you spot the missing guest? Yes, you're absolutely right. That would be Czechoslovakia. They were not invited, and neither was the Soviet Union, which also pissed off Joseph Stalin. Without consulting the Czechs, the four powers agreed that the Sudetenland should be given to Germany immediately. The governments of Britain and France made it clear to Czechs that if they rejected this solution, they would have to fight Germany by themselves. This was the crowning moment of the policy of appeasement. On October 1st, 1938, German troops occupied the Sudetenland. Polish and Hungarian troops also occupied areas of Czechoslovakia which contained a majority of Poles and Magyars. The dismemberment of Czechoslovakia was complete when Germany formally annexed what is today the Czech Republic in March of 1939, while Slovakia seceded and became an Axis ally. So let's return to our earlier scene. Chamberlain is waving that piece of paper, the newly signed agreement, at Heston Airport. To him, it's a formal guarantee of peace in our time in Europe. To Hitler, it's just a scrap of paper. Now, back in the day, Chamberlain was probably all like, guys, we should get some copies of this just in case we lose it. I mean, crack out the team of people who copy things word for word. I'm assuming they didn't have photocopiers back then. Maybe they did, who knows? But losing your documents isn't something that you need to worry about if you're like me and you have today's sponsor Backblaze. And it's not just losing files, but it also protects you from hard disk failure or theft of your laptop, or God forbid your house burns down or something like that. All of your data will be secure if you have Backblaze. Now, I always try out the sponsors that we have on this channel, but I've actually been using Backblaze for years, way before they sponsored this video, way before they sponsored any of my videos, and I went to them because I looked around and they were the best option. Why? Well, I didn't want to have to think about backups, I just wanted software to run in the background and do it all for me. I have an absolute ton of data, terabytes and terabytes of stuff, and so I really needed unlimited backup, and I also needed it to be cheap because I am a cheap person. Backblaze is cheap, it's $6 a month, it's truly unlimited, there's none of that fair use stuff. I don't know if you guys have ever got an angry letter from your ISP for downloading too much on your unlimited plan. I have. This is truly unlimited. There are no caps with Backblaze, and it also does just run in the background. I usually leave it to just run from, I think it's about 8 p.m. to 6 in the morning, just backing up my files while I'm asleep. Altogether, they've backed up 750 billion megabytes, which is, I don't know, almost inconceptibly. Is that even a word? I can't even conceive how big that is. Now, and the thing is, you really hope you never need their backup, but if you do, you can download it, or if it's a ton of data, they will ship a hard disk to you. So, easy way to get that data fast, and it's all encrypted, of course, in case anyone, nefarious gets their hands on that. It'll just be useless to them. Also, you can get a 15-day free trial to see if it's for you through our link, and just do it. Go to backblaze.com/biographics. Get set up. It's just a good peace of mind.
It's just $6 a month. Well, it's just $6 a month.
And let's get back to Chamberlain. It's easy to say with the power of hindsight that Chamberlain's decision was a completely wrong one. On a moral level, the Western powers, as members of the League of Nations and allied of Czechoslovakia, had a duty to step in and protect an allied country or other member state from aggressions and demands worthy of a schoolyard bully. On a practical level, the matter is far more complicated, but it also weighs against Chamberlain. Now, the assumption that Britain and France were not ready for a full-scale war, especially with Germany, may have been correct. And it is understandable that Chamberlain and Daladier were keen to avoid another mess like World War I. The British Prime Minister had a particular fear of the destruction of civilian targets that could be caused by the new tactics of war from the air. It seems that upon returning from his first flight to Munich, he observed how easy it would have been for a bomber to hit the heart of London. One of his military advisors even told him that 2 months of bombing raids would have caused 1 million victims. But Germany itself was not ready for a war with the West in the autumn of 1938. The Wehrmacht was much weaker than it appeared from Goebbels' propaganda reels. A full mechanization of the Heer, or land forces on the basis of General Guderian's doctrine, it was still on the horizon. More importantly, the high echelons of the armed forces were not a united front supporting the Nazi Party. It is reported, in fact, that the Army Chief of Staff, General Franz Halder, was planning to eliminate Hitler and even carried a loaded gun with him at all times should the occasion arise. In September and October of 1938, the German High Commander was fully aware of the country's relative weakness and did not welcome the prospect of war with Czechoslovakia, even if Britain and France did not come to the rescue. Czechoslovakia may have been a small country, but its army was well trained, well equipped, and well defended by fortifications. Now, did Chamberlain know all of this? Well, apparently he did receive a report from MI5 detailing Halder's plans, but would that have been enough to have changed the opinion of Chamberlain and the majority of the cabinet? More importantly, would that have been enough to change the course of 8 years of foreign policy dedicated to appeasement? Neville Chamberlain became synonymous with appeaser, but certainly he wasn't the first political leader, neither in Great Britain nor elsewhere, to pursue a policy of appeasement in the face of a military threat. So let's just jump into a brief history of appeasement here. Round 1. Japanese invasion of Manchuria. In 1931, an explosion on the South Manchuria Railway gave the Japanese military the perfect excuse to invade this Chinese region to protect Japanese interests in the area. It was all a part of a plan of aggression to expand Tokyo's sphere of influence, provide an outlet for the booming population, and provide new markets for a struggling industrial sector. The League of Nations intervention was initially bent on economic sanctions, which Britain and France did not endorse, fearsome of losing trade with Japan or even provoking a full-scale invasion of British colonies in the Far East. And what was the result? Well, this was a weak plan to create a semi-independent state in Manchuria, which Japan rejected by quitting the League of Nations and going on to complete the invasion of the region and establishing a puppet state. Round 2. Failed Anschluss attempts in 1934. Not 1 year in power, and Hitler and the Nazi government were already bent on annexing Austria. Their plans kicked off with an attempted coup carried out by Austrian Nazis, which were obviously funded and directed from Berlin. The conspirators even managed to assassinate the Prime Minister, and German troops were ready to move in. The Western powers again did not intervene. So, who of all people put an end to this first Anschluss? Well, you might be surprised, that was Benito Mussolini, who at this time was not yet allied to Germany and was instead tied to Vienna in a protective treaty. Mussolini deployed 2 Alpine troop divisions on the Austrian border, and the still weak Wehrmacht had to hit the brakes. Round 3. Italy invades Ethiopia, 1935. Yesterday the defender, today the attacker. A border incident with Ethiopia gave Mussolini the excuse to order an invasion of Ethiopia in October of 1935. British public opinion was in favour to intervene against fascist Italy. It would have been dead easy. Just shutting down the Suez Canal to Italian shipping would have put an end to the invasion, but Prime Minister Baldwin, he didn't want to alienate Mussolini and his anti-German stance. Any intervention was delegated to the League of Nations. While negotiations dragged on into 1936, the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa, fell in May of 1936. Round 4. Hitler retakes the Rhineland, March 1936. The Rhineland includes the border areas with the Low Countries, which were meant to stay demilitarized as per the Treaty of Versailles. But taking advantage of the Ethiopian crisis, the German army just up and went. They took a huge gamble, by the way. The marching units carried rifles loaded with blanks and had strict orders to retreat immediately at the slightest sign of Franco-British resistance. But resistance, it did not materialize. The occupation, it was carried out, and Germany gained a huge advantage in preparation for the war to come. Round 6. Japan invades the rest of China, 1937. What started as minor clashes between the Imperial Japanese Army and the Chinese nationalist forces in July of that year quickly escalated into a full-blown invasion. As usual, the Western powers, the Soviet Union, the League of Nations, they just looked on while the Japanese carried out indiscriminate bombing of civilian targets. Interestingly, help for Chiang Kai-shek's Chinese nationalists came from Nazi Germany in the shape of training and supplies. Round 7. The successful Anschluss in March of 1938. When Germany incorporated Austria, the West remained silent and Italy was now on the side of the invader. But now Chamberlain had replaced Baldwin as Prime Minister, and as you may have guessed, he simply continued with the same policy put into practice by his predecessors and fellow member states of the League of Nations. In addition to the desire of avoiding a major war on the continent, Chamberlain was also motivated by compensating Germany in some way for the harsh treatment imposed by the Treaty of Versailles. Moreover, one of the key principles of the post-World War I world order was self-determination. Based on that principle, wasn't it lawful to allow German minorities to reunite with their motherland? And now for just one more bonus round, the Spanish Civil War of 1936 to 1939. Now we could talk for hours on end about this war, but I'll make just one point. Italy, Germany, and the Soviet Union all intervened heavily, supporting opposing factions with troops, weapons, and money. On the other hand, Britain and France simply forbid the supply of arms to either side. This non-interventionist policy was a continuation of Baldwin's plan not to alienate Mussolini's sympathies. And, well, yeah, that worked a treat, didn't it? And now let's zoom back in to London and fast forward to the 3rd of September 1939. Neville Chamberlain has just announced on the radio that Great Britain is now at war with Germany. All of his efforts to maintain peace in Europe were all in vain in the end. Chamberlain's leadership during the war is considered lackluster at best, and these months were called the so-called phony war, in which French and British troops did little but stand by the Maginot Line waiting for a German attack. However, it is fair to recognize one important victory which can be attributed to Chamberlain's foresight: the Battle of Britain, or the months-long duel in which the Royal Air Force established air superiority over the Luftwaffe, thus preventing Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Great Britain. In the months after the Munich Treaty, Chamberlain led the development of Britain's air defense systems, the most sophisticated in Europe. It was thanks to him that the Royal Air Force could rely on the revolutionary invention of radar to coordinate wave after wave of Spitfire fighter planes against incoming German squadrons. But Neville Chamberlain could not reap the reward for such a success. On the 10th of May 1940, after a failed attempt to reclaim Norway from Nazi occupation, Chamberlain resigned. Winston Churchill, the main architect of the Norwegian debacle, became the new Prime Minister. Chamberlain continued to serve in Churchill's cabinet, but resigned for good in October of 1940, too ill with late-stage bowel cancer. Not 1 month later, on the 9th of November, Chamberlain died in his estate near Reading in southern England. Now, you might think that it's really easy to just dismiss Neville Chamberlain as a gullible man, a naive appeaser who did not respond to Hitler's provocations for all the wrong reasons. But the reality now is far more complex, and it's understandable how appeasement may have been considered as the best option at that time. However, Chamberlain had a record for breaking away with established policies, and had he listened to other opinions rather than the conservative majority, he could have changed the course of history for the better. Winston Churchill probably summarized the Czech crisis and appeasement with one of his most quotable lines addressed to Chamberlain. "You were given the choice between war and dishonor. You chose dishonor, and you will have war." So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, you know what to do. Hit that thumbs up button below, and don't forget to subscribe. When you're subscribing, make sure you hit that notification bell so you actually find out when we put out a new video. And as always, thank you for watching.